In the presidential elections in Belarus for the first time in 1994, Alexander Lukashenko won, receiving 80% of the vote. Then he was able to gain popularity with the image of a man of the people, opposition to the government, and the image of a fighter against scammers, created thanks to his leadership in the Parliamentary Anti-Corruption Committee. The results of subsequent elections showed approximately the same number of votes. However, fewer and fewer countries began to recognize their results. In 2020, election fraud sparked the most massive protest in the history of Belarus, where Lukashenko was given the nickname Sasha 3%. For exactly 30 years, the pro-Russian dictator has frozen our country in time, destroying our parliament and institutions. He has jailed and killed dissenters, stealing our children's future. Yet despite decades of repression, we still fight for a free, democratic, European Belarus. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, head of the United Transnational Cabinet of Belarus, on X social network. Experts say that mass support for Lukashenko's policies continued until about the mid-2000s. According to analysts, public opinion was strongly influenced by the Kremlin's pressure on Belarus to demand closer integration within the framework of the Union State project. Then Russia raised gas prices, which caused a decline in the Belarusian economy.
This was the time of 2005 and 2006, when this return to the Union State began again, and Belarusians simply began to live worse. Before, they had lived more or less normally, as Lukashenko said, better than in Russia. And after 2006, we began to live worse and worse. And the turning point was, in my opinion, the reincarnation of the Union Treaty.
Ideologically, Lukashenko was an adapter of the revival of the USSR. In 1991, he refused to vote for the independence of Belarus, later voting against the ratification of the Belavezha Accords. And in 1995, Lukashenko initiated a referendum with the replacement of state symbols, the white-red-white flag and the Pahonia coat of arms, with updated Soviet analogues. The referendum also included the question of granting Russian language the status of a second state language. After the adoption of these changes, the policy of Russification of Belarus intensified. There were almost no Belarusian language media in the country. All document circulation is conducted in Russian, and artists are persecuted for using songs in their native language.
Belarusian-speaking residents very often represent both the cultural and political elite of the country. They support the fight against authoritarianism and advocate for fair elections, and are also often supporters of a pro-European cause. Simply put, today the Belarusian language is a language of the opposition. Thus, all Belarusian-speaking communities, organizations, parties, educational institutions in Belarusian, as well as cultural figures, officials and politicians who speak their native language, they all pose a threat to the dictator's power. From a publication by The Insider.
Due to election fraud and pressure on freedom of speech, Western countries were reluctant to make contact with Minsk. The EU has initiated sanctions against the Belarusian government since the late 90s. However, Lukashenko has always maneuvered between Moscow and the West without completely siding with the Kremlin and sometimes agreeing with the demands of the European Union to release political prisoners. The final turn towards the Kremlin occurred after mass protests in 2020, when Lukashenko's regime survived solely thanks to the support of Moscow. Lukashenko's desire for greater cooperation with Russia resulted in the implementation of the Union State project, and now the Federation wants to absorb Belarus using it.
Still, now this initiative is more of Russia, and Lukashenko is being put under more pressure in this direction. And of course, only Russia is interested in the Union State project. Now it is more Russia than Belarus. Belarus is interested only as financial support for the power of Alexander Lukashenko, nothing more.
In addition, Belarus is an accomplice in Russia's war against Ukraine. In February 2022, the Russian army used the territory of the country to enter the northern regions of Ukraine. In addition, Russia launched its aircraft from Belarusian airfields. In October 2022, Lukashenko confirmed Belarus' participation in the war, but with the caveat that the Belarusian army does not kill anyone and does not send its military to Ukraine. Also, at the end of June, the EU announced the introduction of sanctions against Belarus for close cooperation between Minsk and Moscow in economic terms and assistance to the Russian Federation in circumventing restrictions. Reported by Diana Kolesnik, Andriy Dmitrenko, UATV News.